Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Waves Open Sessions, and welcome to my good friend, Mr. Ken Pooch Van Druten.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
I'm amazing, and they said they're fine. Thank you for asking. All right, so you have some amazing experience and some amazing knowledge when it comes to both the studio world and the live world. Clearly, Waves plugins work in both, and we have a very, very solid stance in both. And both industries right now are taking a huge hit because of the COVID pandemic. So, this is a live session, but I am right if I'm guessing I'm right that the mix and the application and the skills you're going to be talking about here work in both live and the studio, correct?
They do. Yeah, they've kind of merged these days. What's coming out of my left and right of a console these days is hopefully something I would be proud to make a record out of, actually.
Excellent. So there's going to be quite a few people who have seen a lot of these events that I do every week who have never seen what we're looking at right now. So I know what this is, but, you have an accent, I don't. So how about you tell them what we're looking at on the screen?
What kind of accent do I have? That's hilarious.
You have an American accent.
Yes, I do. Californian, even though I live in Texas. Guys, you're looking at the LV1. Which is a software-based, console that Waves put out a couple years ago, and it is amazing. If you haven't had an opportunity to mess around with this, you really should. Mainly because of how good it sounds. Just not even plugins installed. Just like sending information through it. The summing part of this desk is really awesome. I say desk, but it's a piece of software. This is the LV1 if you've never seen it before. Michael, should I just get into it?
Yeah, so this is a 64-channel console. It works on a computer. It's touchscreen, plus you can use proper tactile hardware fader banks with it. Touring engineers and monitoring engineers and houses of worship use this as a live console rather than a big piece of hardware. It's more flexible, it's future-proof, and it gives you a ton of power when it comes to plug-in DSP and flexibility. So take us through the session, Pooch. It's like, so this is a slash session. 3 questions. When did you record it? Where was he? And what were you doing there?
So this is from a show at the Roxy, believe it or not, famous club on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. We were doing an entire tour where we were playing huge festivals like Rock 'em Ring and Rock 'em Park, but he wanted to come back home to Los Angeles and have like a kind of a hometown little club, real up close show. And I believe this was in 2011, so it's been around for a while. But it was originally recorded on Venue Profile and Pro Tools. So then I've done is just taken the Wave tracks and put them into Reaper, actually. And Reaper shows up on the network with LV1. So yeah, it's virtual playback of that show. It was a lot of fun. It was an amazing show, as you would expect. It was, I don't even know, probably less than 500 people, like just crammed into a sweaty club, having a great time. So yeah, that's where this is from.
Usually, that would sound like a lot of fun. Right now, that sounds like it would give me anxiety.
It's definitely not something you want to do right this instant, for sure.
All right, so let's press play and have a listen.
Cool. Here we go.
Yeah. woke up this morning all alone. I got a ringing in my head. I couldn't take it anymore today. She left me here for dead. Oh, yeah. And it don't come as no surprise. I should have known it from the start. The lights are faded and I can't deny this place ain't got no heart. Actually, it does. You people do. If you can't hear me tonight, if you can't hear me tonight, you'll have to carry me back from Cali.
So that gives you an idea of what's going on. I'm sure we'll listen to more audio pieces of it as we go here.
God, sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, listen, this is a guitar, bass, drum, vocal band. It's a rock and roll band, and the inputs coming to me are pretty good to start with. So, basically using plugins to try to just put my little spin on what's already coming at me good. I recognize that I'm very lucky that I get to work with bands that are amazing, and Slash is one of those guys.
Okay, hold. This is, yes, you are very lucky, but you've also worked really hard and worked your ass off to get there. So I'm going to put a lot of that down, not to luck, but to hard work and moving your way up. But where did you actually start? How do you get into live sound? Because if I remember rightly, it wasn't where you started.
No, not at all. I went to Berklee College of Music, graduated from there. I moved to Los Angeles, and the intent was to have a producer, engineer career. This is in the early 90s, 1991. I got sidetracked. I ended up doing like 3 or 4 years of making records, and I had some great success, and won some or was nominated for some Grammys. And so that was awesome. But then I got an opportunity to mix a live show, which I had never done before. Even in all my years of being a musician, I'd never done that. And I just fell in love with the instant gratification that happens in a live show. There's reaction when you push a guitar solo and 30,000 people are screaming for something that you're doing. To me, there's nothing like that. I can't get that in the studio.
I remember it's got to be at least 7 years ago now that I hung out with you at like 3 Linkin Park shows in a row at front of house.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's nearly like the all-powerful Marvel's Superman hand. It's like you push that fader up of that one effect that you created for the band, and you're a part of the band whenever you're mixing that. Yeah, I can totally see that. Okay, so let's get back to, this is obviously a Waves open session, so this is a session. Where do you want to start? Because I see one of your favorite plugins, the C6, I see a C4, I see a bunch of plugins which say emo on them, which you're probably going to have to explain. Where do you want to start here?
I figure, most people go straight to drums. So let's not do that. Let's kind of deconstruct this. Maybe start with my mix bus and work backwards. How about that?
Perfect.
So here is my left and right. And there's 3 plugins on my left and right. And I'd like to show you how much these plugins are actually elevating my mix. And I did that on purpose. In some times, I build a mix where I'm doing a lot more things on my input channels to achieve the left and right being, not having any plugins on it. And I've done that in the past where absolutely my left and right has not had any plugins. But I built this mix so that it's good, but when you put the plugins on the master bus, man, it turns it into something amazing, just to kind of showcase what you can do with your master bus. So what I'd like to do is go through these just a little bit. C6, it's my good friend. I mean, this is my Desert Island plugin. If I could choose no other plugin and was stuck on a desert island, this would be the one that I would choose. It's a compressor and an expander, and an EQ, and all of those things. So what you can see here on my mix bus a little bit, I've elevated a little bit of the low end here. You can see I've got 3 dB, and the crossover point is at 60. So it's basically 60 and below. I've boosted 3 dB just to give it some oomph underneath. And then let's see, what else have I done here? I boosted a little bit of 2.5, and that was probably a result of the end result of like, okay, I got everything together, but there's something missing, like maybe in the vocal, like it needed a little bit of bite or whatever, and I achieved that by coming here to the mix bus. So I do have a really small Q, and boosted at 1 dB at 2K or 2518. And the rest of it is kind of just tickling along. I'll play just a little snippet so you can see how it tickles it a little.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's go with the other 2 plugins, and then we'll come back and we'll add those plugins, take them out and add them in. Let's see. So in the pre-show, we were talking a little bit about how in live sound, we've come kind of full circle, and we're basically making record quality mixes with impact, which means that I'm utilizing the tools that broadcast guys use and studio guys use. And one of those is the L3. The L3 is this amazing expander compressor that kind of just it adds glue to your mix. I can't describe it any better than that. It makes all of the things kind of just come together and be solid. I'll punch that out here in a minute, and you'll definitely hear that. And then finally, on my mix bus here is my third. This is my new favorite mix bus plugin. If I have made anything in the last 6 months, whether it's studio or live, this plugin has been involved. If you're not familiar with it, you should check it out. It's really unbelievable. It does a bunch of different things. One of the things that I really love about it is this spreader section over here. It kind of just takes your whole mix and does this and opens it up, and allows the center part of your mix. It's almost like an MS thing. Like it allows the center part of your mix to be prominent and cut through that vocal, and then spread apart. It spreads the frequencies out a little bit. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. I'm utilizing the compressor and the EQ here. So let's listen for a second, and then I'm gonna pop these out. Here we go.
And it's comments no surprise. I should have known it from the start. The lights are faded and I can't deny this place ain't got no heart. Actually, it does. You people do.
All right, so obviously there's a little bit of a level drop just because there's gain happening, but I hope you could hear how much of a difference that stuff makes.
One of the first questions was actually from Joe, who said he'd love to hear what you're using the L2 and the L3 for in your signal chain. Well,
there it is.
That
we're doing that. Let's go through these just kind of individually, looking at them as there's some music playing through them, and pop them in and out so you can have an idea what's going on. So that gain that I'm talking about is mostly happening here, I think, in the L3. And the reason you can do that is the L3 helps to kind of with all of the peaks of things. So I'm able to get the expansion and compression of the peaks in line, and therefore it allows me to turn up the overall output just a little bit.
Well, there's a backup question to that, which is that he knows that this isn't the low latency version. Is like, you don't need the low latency version on your master, really, do you?
That's a great question. So in front of house, I don't really care, within reason. Like if we're talking about 20 milliseconds, then I'm like, okay. But within reason, I'm already moving speakers around with all kinds of delay and moving subs around with all kinds of delay. It really doesn't matter too much to me, latency wise, as long as we're within the, whatever, 6, 7, 8 milliseconds, which is easily done, even using the high latency plugins. But it's a great question. So if you're in monitor world, let's go off a little bit here. We'll come back to that. But in monitor world, there's this series of emo plugins, if you've never heard of these. And these particular plugins were designed to be super low latency and were designed with the LV1 in mind. So if you are a monitor guy, and you're super worried about latency, you need to keep everything under 3 milliseconds or whatever. These are the plugins you need to go after. They have, let's see if I can grab another one here. Good times. They have 3 versions of them. One is, basically high pass, low pass filtering. One is it's kind of a multi expansion and compression plugin. Does gating here. It's got a leveler. It's got a de-esser. It's got a limiter, and it's got compression. So if you're looking for low latency, these are the plugins that you want to go to. Cool. All right. Maybe let's go back to our mix bus here.
I have a question for you on the Abbey Road. If we're going to,
let's go there.
Question. Douglas wants to know how you feel about the spreader in the Abbey Road TG mastering plugin compared to, say, the spread in the PS22.
I prefer the spread in the Abbey Road TG mastering tool. Something about it feels more gluey, for lack of a better term, than the other. I think that whatever algorithms that Waves has written for the digital side of this, they've really captured the analog. There's 2 different kinds of plugins, right, guys? I mean, I know you know this, but there's plugins that they are looking at a piece of analog gear and saying, we want to replicate this piece of gear. And so I believe that they've really done that with this, in particular, the Abbey Road TG mastering. And so they've captured that spread that, Abbey Road has been famous for a while. They've used that on a lot of records, especially with this device. Let's look at that, and I can show you a little bit. I'm going to play some, and then I'm going to mess around maybe with the spread only and see if you guys can hear the difference. All right.
Should have known it from the start. The lights are faded and I can't deny this place ain't got no heart. Actually, it does. You people do.
So I hope that you guys can hear that out there. But if it's awesome what it does, it just takes your whole mix and does this to it. It works really well, especially when we're talking about high track count stuff. The biggest problem for me in anything when we're talking about mixing is finding stereo space and finding depth and finding EQ space. Those are the three things that I concentrate on when I'm building a mix, right? And what I always say is in those three things, not two things can share the same space. So for instance, let's say in the stereo spectrum, if I place something at 10 o'clock, I don't really place anything else there. So if I have a guitar at 10 o'clock, I can put things at 9:30 and at 10:30, but at 10 o'clock, that's its own, it gets to that own space, right? And so I think about that with every instrument that's happening. So that gets, where that gets hard is when we're talking about a band that has 120 inputs. Like, where do I put those things in the space? And so this plugin kind of helps, that whole spreader thing kind of helps make space so that I can put things there. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing tool. I'll play just a little clip again, and I'm just going to pop the whole plugin out. So now what you're going to hear is only the C6 and the L3 by itself. So you can see that, I mean, to me, it just makes all the difference in the world, right? It changes the mix drastically. Obviously, you can see I'm doing some EQ like up here in the top. At 11K, I'm adding some air, like plus 4 dB of air. So you're hearing some of that. But notice that it's under the mid side, so it's kind of spreading that air out in the mix.
So I got a couple of questions here for you on your mix bus, because these are some eagle-eyed people, Pooch.
I love it.
Maria is saying the L3 is a brick wall limiter. She's noticing that you're using the L3 and then compressing it afterwards. Yes. So what's the theory behind that in your while you're doing this mix?
That's cool that you caught that. The reason is that I like the characteristics of this TG mastering chain compressor. I like what it does. And so I know the L3 is a brick wall limiter. Let me show you real quick how much of compression I'm really doing. Not a whole lot. All I'm doing with the L3 is kind of just clipping the tops, right? Getting those in order. And so I'm using the TG to kind of be overall compression. I really like the sound of it. And then the C6 before that, you guys saw that earlier. It's kind of tickling stuff a little bit as well. When it comes to compression, I, for the most part, am not the guy that digs into compression hard, unless I'm looking for a tone. So things like the LA3 and the 1176 model, the CLA 1176, their compression is not transparent compression. Their compression is there's a tone that happens when you get in hard into that compressor. And so those are maybe compressors that I maybe dig into quite a bit. But in regards to transparent compression, I am the guy that usually just does a little bit of tickling just to kind of keep everything in order. But what you'll notice is that I do have kinds of series of compression going on. So like if you looked at my group section, you will also notice that there is compression happening here in groups before it gets to the mix bus, right? So all my compressors are just kind of tickling, but the sum of all of that along the way ends up probably being, 3 to 6 dB of compression. It's just in stages, if that makes sense.
All right, so back to the master bus. I've got two more questions from two more eagle eyes. Hardik and Matt. Matt says, why are you using the EQ in both the C6 and the Abbey Road, and what's the difference in the way they sound? And then Hardik says, can you talk about what's the idea while dialing in the C6 on your mix bus?
Interesting. Okay. So the C6 EQ side of the C6, super transparent. There is no harmonic distortion. It's literally you turn up 3 dB and it is 3 dB of whatever frequencies that you're using. I treat the C6 in a way like a crossover. So I look at it and I say, okay, I need some more sparkly bits. So I'm going to boost. If you'll see everything here, it's like 4K and above. I have a 1.8 boost on it. So that must have been, as I was mixing, I was like, you know what? Everything above 4K needs a little bit of lift. And then I must have come down here, added this plugin and went, you know what? Even more air at 11K. Now, the reason that I have EQ in both spots is I treat C6 like a crossover, and boost or cut whole sections of EQ. And then I use the TG mastering chain as like a really precise thing. And this particular plugin does have a lot of harmonic distortion, and I like what it does when you boost EQ frequencies. It actually adds not only that air at 11K, but adds kind of a harmonic distortion thing as well.
We have one more question on the master bus before we can move on, because guys, we gotta move on.
This goes by quick, doesn't it?
It does. Kevin Foreman is hello, Kevin. Would you use the Abbey Road TG mastering plugin on your master bus during mixing in a studio recorded version, or would you use it after the mix is done during the mastering process? And are you just using it now because it's a live performance?
If I understand the question correctly, I don't utilize this as a mastering tool for the most part, unless someone sends me a project to work on that is already mixed and they want me to master it. Then I would utilize this as a mastering tool. But in general, it's on my mix bus in studio and in live. And it's been there since it's come out, really.
One of the questions I want to know is, because one of the things I love about this plugin is the fact that you can actually change the order of the limiter, the tone section, and the belt. So it looks like you've done that here. What was the process behind thinking that, how you wanted your chain of events to go?
Very astute of you, Michael. There's a difference in sound between EQ compression or compression EQ, right? Those two different things are very different sounding, and how they're different sounding is whether or not you want that EQ and the threshold of that EQ to be triggered by some drastic EQ that I'm doing. So I did move the compressor over away from this, it's not drastic, but I am doing 4 dB of boost at 11K. If I had the compressor after the EQ, that 11K would kind of act on the threshold of the compression and be a different sound. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It made perfect sense. Okay, so that's, my friends, that is the master bus. Now, this obviously is LV1, and we do actually have an LV1 question. Jimmy Howell says, I'm an LV1 user and love it completely. Thank you, Jimmy. I can't really imagine not mixing on it. Just wondering if you've ever had to have a deciding factor between whether you were going to mix a specific show on a hardware console like an SD7 or on the LV1. Is it a flexibility thing, or is it just is it a travel thing, or because obviously you can't take an SD7 everywhere with you?
Yeah, that's true. I say to people that in any instance that I have a band that is under 64 inputs, my first go-to is the LV1. I just think it's got something about it in its summing, and this is nothing against Digico. I use Digico, products almost exclusively, but there's something about the summing on this particular desk, and also the DigiGrid converters that were made in conjunction with Digico are some pretty amazing conversion in your final step to analog. It's just something about them that's really great. So the short answer to that is that I definitely use this on any band that was under 64 inputs. Unfortunately, I don't work for many bands that are under 64. Now, the thing that I have thought about is, showing up somewhere and having an artist see you working on just a laptop, right? That's something to think about. And I think LV1 users have started creating big, touchscreens and having some tactile USB faders, not only for workflow, but also so that an artist doesn't walk up to the thing and go, what is that? Is that our console?
Right. Well,
I think there's a preconceived idea of what stuff should look like. But the thing is if you can get an artist on the LV1 to try it and listen to it, they'll love it right away.
having said that, I'm going to add to this, Pooch, is if you are not familiar with LV1, please type in LV1 into the search box on waves.com. We developed this console to look very, very cool as well as sound amazing. So the combo is available and the options and hardware available as well as software available here. It's like this console can be that console that everybody goes, what's that? So
Totally.
Please, I encourage you to go and have a look. Okay, so we've looked at the master bus. Where do you want to go next? Because obviously it's not drums.
Let's go to the name on the marquee, shall we? Let's go to Slash and talk about what I've done with his guitar and also Bobby's guitar. So guitars. This is, this is a guitar, bass, and drum band, right? So you would think that I would just take the guitar and place it at 2:00, wherever he is on stage, and be done with it. But you kind of have to create space as well in that. Let me recall this scene in case I did anything to my mix bus. What I've done is kind of placed Slash. You can see he's placed here at, I don't know, about 130, it looks like, in the panning. But what I've done with both guitars is made an image of that guitar hard panned. So there is a 1:00 of the main guitar input that's coming in, and then a super hard panned version of a delayed version of that to kind of spread the guitar all the way over on the side of my mix. And I've done that on both sides with both guitar players. And so what that does is I'll play you an example here in a minute. It spreads that guitar out, makes it nice and big, and gives the appearance that, 2 tracks of guitars. Here's the actual inputs. Let me show you. The actual inputs are just 2 different inputs. I use a Palmer speaker DI on all of my guitars, PDI 09. It's a great speaker DI. And then the microphone, which I believe for Slash was just a 57, right in the cone. And I use a combination of both of those things to create his tone. So before we get too far in that, and you'll also see what I was showing before was this group, right? Which shows a little bit of panning here. And what you'll notice on the actual inputs, I've also done some panning. And the reason is when you start smearing, I call it smearing, when you start smearing sounds, when you start taking a sound and using phase to make it seem bigger, you have to really pay attention and listen. A lot of times I put on a pair of headphones and listen to what happens to the comb filtering and the phase when you start smearing this signal. And so the reason that some of these pans, they're not just there willy-nilly. It means that I spent a bunch of time listening in headphones and went, okay, this has to move just a little bit in order to make the overall tone of it. So anyway, let's listen to, like, I just want to show you what the inputs are. Also on the inputs, just so you know, is just basically a high pass and a low pass filter. So you guys can see what that is. Here's just his guitar. So that's the speaker DI. Here's the mic with it. So it's pretty cool. It's, I mean, in the mix, that would be okay, something hanging out at 1 o'clock. But if we go, I made a scene here. That's easy to grab. If we go and we look at the group part of this, you will notice that I'm also using a CLA 3A. This plugin is like one of my favorite plugins on guitar. I used to use it in the analog world, and it carries over into live. One little thing, if you're not familiar with live stuff, one thing that you should know about with these plugins is there's this little analog button down here. And I think when you bring up any of CLA's stuff, the 1176, the 2A, and the 3A, the default of that is to have the 60 hertz button engaged. Us live guys, we don't need any more any more buzzes or clicks or noises in our mix bus. We've got enough of that already. So it's something to pay attention to if you're a live guy. When the plugin comes up defaulted to that 60 hertz, I always turn it off. Even though, studio guys will tell you that analog piece does change the tone a little bit, and it does. But I just don't need that extra noise in my mix. So we got that. And then on the group is an F6. And if you're not familiar with this, this is my second Desert Island plugin. It does some pretty amazing things. It's dynamic compression, basically expansion. You can choose, individual pieces of things and decide what they do, expand or compress or whatever. And this is Slash. I'll let you have a look at it. So again, just tickling some compression here and there, doing maybe 3 dB of compression in a bunch of different places leading up to my mix bus. So that's generally what I do with compression. Go ahead.
I have a question from Richard, who says, is the second guitar track panned hard right just a copy of the track, or are you using a bus?
That's a good question. The way that I'm getting there is these two microphones, right? Slash's DI and mic are going to this group, which has the CLA 3A and F6 on it. And I believe they're routed to the monitor section. Yep. And then in the monitor section, let me get you there. I have a band bus that has an F6 on it. And so what's going to the band bus is, the basically this Slash's group and Slash's delay. I'm using the effects path to go from the group of the guitar to that delay. which I'll show you here in a second what that delay is doing. I hope does that answer the question?
Yeah,
Anna?
totally does. And just before we move on, while we're looking at guitars and DIs, there's another question. David Jaycox wants to know if you ever use in phase between the DI and the amp.
I do. That's a great tool. I use it a lot, like when I'm talking about snare drums versus overheads. I use it a lot there. I use it a lot in bass mic and bass DI. I find in guitars, in particular, I kind of like the latency that happens between the DI and the microphone, and you'll see how I am only using I'm using more of the DI versus the microphone. Now that has to do with level that's coming to me as well, but there's a fine spot that you develop to find that thing. I'm trying to get across to you guys that I spend an immense amount of time making sure that all of these phasey things that I'm doing to my mix are all working together and not causing a huge amount of comb filtering, etc. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It did. And while we're still on guitars, Johan wants to know, firstly, he says, absolutely great sounding mix. How do you make the guitars be heard everywhere in the venue when using panning to one side?
So that's a great question. So if I'm in a smaller club and there is only a left and a right, then I might think about bringing things in a little bit. But I got to be honest, I've spent hours and hours kind of making that tone of that. I don't want to mess that up, and I can easily mess that sound up by just moving a couple of pan knobs. Here, I'll show you. Watch. So you hear how it gets all phasey and weird and comb filtery and whatever. Where you place those things is like really, really important. And so when I'm creating phasey stuff like this, I don't want to mess with it. So generally, I would probably leave this, even in a case where there's only a left and a right. But speaking in bigger terms, when we're talking about a larger arena, what I do is on the side hangs, I actually flip the left and right so that left and right is like this. I can't how I'm looking at you, but it's left, right, left on the outside. And so the people that are sitting on the right-hand side are getting a piece of the left from the side hang, if that makes sense. So I get it by speaker placement. And that way you don't alienate the people over here from getting slash, right? And it keeps my mix the way that I want it. So that's how I would do it when I have a side hang. In a smaller club, you know what? It's like, I think that it's small enough that that doesn't matter. Even people sitting over here are still getting this speaker. That makes sense.
Oh, very, very cool. So, okay, so we've dealt with the master. We've looked at how cool his guitar is and how you do that. What's next?
Cool. Before we go there, just one little thing. I'm going to show you what I'm using here on Slash, and the other guitar is, this is a great plugin, Super Tap. And basically, I'm just using it to create a super small amount of delay so that I can spread it out. And I'll show you real quick just what it does. So, I mean, when we're talking about a small band like this where there's 16 inputs, man, I want to make it be big and have space. And this is how I achieve that. So I do that on both guitars, and they're opposite mirroring images of each other too, by the way. So let me see if I can give you this, give you this. Sorry, I know we're running out of time and you want to get to other shit, but I just think this is pretty
we're
cool.
not running. We're not running out of time. We're absolutely
okay.
fine.
Good. So let me just show you like both guitars and the time that I spent to make sure both guitars share equal space on both sides. So I spent a lot of time making sure that both have this space, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's guitars. Let's move on. How about bass guitar? That's a pretty simple thing to go check out.
You see,
quickly.
I already have a question about the bass guitar from David, who wants to know what's that vitamin on the bass doing.
Awesome. I love that people are like totally. I'm paging through stuff and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute, what is that?" Cool. All right. So Vitamin, what a great plugin, man. It does some amazing stuff. It's frequency spreading for specific frequencies. It's like basically taking a crossover and making frequency, only that certain frequency band be something that is spread or narrow. So let's just listen to the bass guitar here. Let's get rid of him and him. So there's a little level drop there because I'm doing compression, using the compression part of this plugin. But really, I'll play it again and focus in kind of on the low end part of this. I'm taking it I'm not spreading it out. I'm focusing it, the low end part of the bass guitar, to be like really centered. Let me try to gain match this so that it's a little bit more apparent. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's focusing the low end of the instrument forward, kind of, and also doing some compression of the mid range and getting rid of some of that nastiness that's happening in the distortion part of this sound.
One of my favorite things about this plugin is the fact that you have this amazing, powerful width adjustment with your low mid, your mids, your high, and you can either adjust them all at once with that width master or do them individually. So when it does come to something like where you just wanted to focus everything and center it, you can. And you can also, do you use the solo function on this plugin a lot to kind of like focus in on which frequencies so you can get the crossovers right?
Yeah, man, that's badass. So what he's talking about is sorry, we're listening to a Q version of this, so I think soloing within the plug is not going to work in what we're doing right now, unfortunately. Sorry guys, but it has to do with the way that I have this routed right now, guys. If this were just coming out of the mix bus, you would hear that I can actually solo individual bands of this, which, by the way, is an amazing tool on your mix bus. It's part of the reason, sorry to keep going back to my mix bus, but it's part of the reason I use C6 on my mix bus. You'll be able to hear that here. Broken and I lost my way. You'll have to I really use this plugin specifically as a tool sometimes when I'm tuning PAs. Being able to hear things as if it were a crossover and hear, if there's a problem happening with a speaker, this is an amazing tool. So that solo function that you just heard with the C6 also can be done with a Vitamin. It's just the way that I have it routed right now.
One of the other questions about the bass was, can we take a look at the bass guitar inputs as well?
Sure.
If you're doing anything there.
Cool. Great question. So yes, I am using one of my next favorite plugins in the world. I have lots of favorites, but it's funny if you look across, like, let's just look and see what my choices are across inputs, for instance. You'll look across. I end up using like Shep's Omni channel a lot. Not in this mix so much, but Shep's Omni channel is kind of my new favorite go-to in regards to vocals and regards to instruments. It's this plugin. If you guys haven't experienced this plugin, it's amazing. It too is like that TG mastering tool where you can move sections around and do, have it be in various, mic pre first or EQ first or comp first. So I'll show you a little bit, just the bass guitar. This is just the direct input, I think. So the DI, this is a DI, right? This is coming straight out of his, whatever, his pedal board. So it's basically going bass to the pedal board through this DI to his amp. It's not very friendly. It just doesn't have, it's not great sounding, to be honest. And so I did quite a bit of work to kind of, help this thing. So you'll see there's even extreme EQ going on here, plus 18 at super high stuff, 2K. There's another 8 dB boost at the same frequency. That's interesting. It's funny deconstructing your mix. These are things that I don't even go back and look at. I just, you're listening and you do stuff, and then coming back and looking at stuff, you're like, oh, okay, well, I wonder why I did that. Obviously, it needed it. So anyway, the difference between this and this is big. And part of the reason was, I guess I felt like I needed that 2K 1.9 to like cut through the mix. So I added that here. Now you're only hearing the DI. So let's go back to just this. Let's go here because now I'll know that got it all. So that's what we just listened to. Let's listen to the Palmer, which is actually a speaker DI. This is coming straight out of his head, in between the head and the speaker itself. So I'm doing a bunch of stuff to both inputs to kind of get the result that I'm after. So yeah, I mean, if we take, for instance, let's do this. Let's take out all three of these plugins so that you can hear kind of what's the direct. It's not very pretty. So yeah, Sometimes
Sounds much better. Sounds much better.
I hope so. Sometimes you have to do drastic things, right?
Can you just go back to Shep's Omni-channel for a second, please?
Sure.
So, guys and girls, one of the things, there was another one that you had, where was the, yeah.
I know what you're after. Hold on. I think you're after this. No.
Yes. No, that'll do. That'll do just fine.
Okay.
That'll do just fine. So one of the things that a lot of people notice when we're in these events and talking about this specific plugin is that there are some knobs that are highlighted blue. Now, the cool thing about this plugin is if you see at the top of the plugin, it has a little word that says focus. When focus is clicked, it will highlight the parameters of that specific preset that are relevant for you to tweak in that preset that will give you the best results. And by doing so, especially when you are either A, learning the ropes of your creative art, or B, when you are in a super big hurry, it does give you a huge amount of advantage of having the guy who created the preset, whichever artist it was, over your shoulder and helping you going, okay, so you need to tweak the frequency to this, or you need to adjust the attack. So focus doesn't always have to be on, but it is a very, very powerful part of this plugin. The second really powerful part of this plugin is the fact that you can actually insert another Shep's Omni EQ or compression module or any other plugin from Waves inside the Shep's Omni channel. So this is, there you go. That's another one of his Desert Island plugins right there. See, so
another one. Yeah. So what that does is some pretty cool stuff, right? Sorry, let me get you back here.
I have a question. I have a question for you on that Shep's Omni channel.
Yes.
Johan wants to know, what made you choose to place the gate after the compressor in the Omni channel? Doesn't a lower dynamic range make life harder for the gate?
In this particular plugin that you're looking at, it's a vocal, and the gate is not engaged.
I think we were talking about, I think he was probably back on the bass guitar.
Okay, let's go back.
Remember, these people have eagle eyes, Pooch.
They do. It's amazing. I love it. Let's look here. So again, the gate is not engaged here, and I don't think it's engaged at the next one either. No. So both of those, I'm not using. Anytime when you're using the Shep's Omni channel and they're not lit up, it means that module is not being utilized.
And therefore, it's not using any DSP or your own CPU. So
correct.
It's a good saver. All right, moving on, my friend. So we are.
You want to catch some drums real quick before we?
You're the one who didn't want to do them first.
I know the 18 inputs. We out of the 24 we didn't get to, but everybody always goes to drums, right? Kick drum first. But let's try to get some of this. Here's drum kit by itself. Cool. So I'll just try to touch. I know we're getting timed here, but Torque Live. If you guys haven't used this, man, this is all about snare drums, all about drums in general. I use this thing on drums all the time. It's basically the ability to kind of create a center tonal part of a drum that maybe doesn't exist. So let me let's see if we can slow this up. Just turn this up so you can kind of hear it. Let me pop this in and out. All right. It's kind of difficult to hear just because of the volume, but let's see. I'm going to move this center so that you have an idea of what's happening here. You guys hear that tonal change? So what that allows you to do amazingly is kind of create a center of whatever is happening in that drum itself. So that, I really like a snare drum to have a tone to it. Like I want it to, have a thing. If you can, this is all the drums again, but listen to the snare drum specifically. Oh, sorry. I think if you looked at my drum mix on Smart, you would see that my snare drum has this 200 and 250 really nice tonality to it. And that didn't exist in the original snare drum. I had to create it using torque.
Okay. You might have to explain to some of the people who aren't from the live sound side what Smart is, just so there's context.
It's basically an RTA, real-time analyzer, the ability to look at your full frequency spectrum and see where stuff is. So I'm just talking about looking at your frequency spectrum. I've created this nice pocket of snare drum at 200 or 250. And by the way, that snare drum is the only instrument that gets to share that EQ space, really. I've purposely high passed things around it so that snare drum gets that space.
Nice. All right. So what's happening in the rest of those drums? Because they are super fat.
Thank you. Basically, Shep's Omnichannel in the kick drum. The snare drum, I obviously had to do, a little bit too. The 1176, I love on snares, along with that torque. Same thing with the snare bottom. Oh, one knob I used on here. So I must have, on the snare bottom, I must have been mixing along and went, man, that snare drum just needs a little more crack. Let's see what it's doing. Yeah. So it's just brightening up the snares a little bit. Great. Utilize these one knob plugins when you have something like that, something very easy that you just need accomplished. Let's see. Hi-hat. Oh, this is another one of my favorites, Shep's 73, man. This is basically a model of the Neve 1073, basically. And it's Shep's version of it. I think you can see a pattern here. I kind of like Andrew Shep's stuff. Anyway, I use it on hi-hat, and I think I have it on overheads as well, and ride cymbal too.
One of the questions coming in, Rudy wants to know how you decide the frequency when you are in torque for the snare.
That's a great question. For me, it's a felt thing. Like I want that snare drum to go thunk. And so I mess around with this part of the plugin to try to find the focus. This plugin shows you this focus, right? Like it shows you when you move it around, it'll show you what's going on. But this amount of that is what I mess around with, just to try to find the meat of the snare drum. I'm looking for that thunk in it, and oftentimes it's right around 200, and in this case it's 229. So hope that answers your question.
It does. Chris from Maryland says, Pooch, can you go over the effects on the drums?
Sure. Let me recall the drums again, and we'll go there. Good times. Okay, so the only thing that I have on drums now, in some cases, I put more than one reverb on drums. But in this particular case, I wanted it to be kind of down and dirty. So in other cases, I have put a reverb that creates space for the kick drum and the snare drum. Usually kind of a smaller reverb just to give it kind of explosive stuff. But in this case, I've really developed this to only be one plugin, and it's this H verb, which is an amazing plugin as well. Now you'll notice that this is pretty short. And actually, in this case, I'm not using a whole lot of pre-delay. In fact, zero, which is kind of unusual for me. I usually do use some pre-delay, but I must have messed around with it and didn't like the results. Sorry, my headphones came unplugged. Good times. Can't hear you. Now I can. And I must have messed around with it and liked it without the pre-delay. So listen again, and I'll pop this reverb out. So it's got a nice tone to it. I like what it does to the drums.
Didn't hear a thing. There's no effect whatsoever. So how often in H Reverb do you expand it out and tweak some of the deeper settings?
I get there sometimes. I mean, it just depends. All right. So some of these expansion things that you can do in the bottom of this are kind of, I think it's a great thing that they've made them like, here are the things if you want to get really advanced into, what the tailoring your reverb. If you don't, then collapse this thing and you don't have to look at it. But what this shows in the expansion part of this is some dampening and, some actual EQ in the reverb itself. I tend to not go here that often. I tend to simply go to now, guys, if you guys don't know about using presets, man, this is the way to start anything. For me, when I pull up a reverb and I say, okay, I need a drum verb, like the first thing that I do is pull up H verb, and then I start poking around in presets, right? I'll come down here and be like, oh, Brad Divens, okay, let's listen to see what the snare drum sounds like, right? So I'll start with a preset and then I'll change it to tailor my thing. In fact, you can see that I started with the Music Club preset, and then see how there's a star there. It means that I've adjusted stuff to tailor it to my own tastes. So I tend to do that with almost all inputs even, start with a preset. If it's a vocal, I'll start with a vocal preset and then always tweak to make it work. If that makes sense. So that's the H verb on the drums.
So one of the questions that's come up a couple of times is when you're doing a mix for a band like this, and this mix sounds really huge, how do you or do you make adjustments between the mix like we've got now for a medium-sized club of 500 people crammed in and a huge cavernous arena? Like, would you adjust that kind of reverb on the drums for that kind of bigger space, or how do you make those adjustments, or make a decision when to make those adjustments?
It's a great question. So I generally my mix stays the same from place to place in general. The only thing that usually changes is anything that has artificial space on it, like drums and reverb. Same with vocals. If I end up in an outdoor situation where there are no reflective surfaces, those reverbs that I have in there will all of my inputs will sound a little bit too dry. So what I'll do in an outdoor situation is bring up the returns of those, reverbs, so that it kind of matches the sound that you're hearing here, where we're really, have things isolated. But in regards to going from a club to an arena, my mix really doesn't change. I tailor the speaker system to work for me or against me, depending on what's happening. But yeah, my mix, my left and right from day to day is pretty much the same.
Beautiful. All right. So we've been through everything now except the vocals. So
Correct.
Let's close on the vocals.
All right. Awesome. Okay. PSE, man. If you guys if you're in the live world and you're not utilizing this plugin, you're really missing out. This plugin has it's basically a vocal gate. It's centered to react to vocals in particular. And it was actually modeled by a Neve piece of gear, I believe. I'm trying to pull up Todd's thing and show you his PSE. Man, it just unclutters your mix. Let me show you what I mean.
Have to carry me back.
So you guys can hear the difference, the noise floor that is just driven up by a huge amount without that plugin engaged. And so if you're using this on vocals, it brings all of that noise and just, takes the clutter out of your mix. So this is a plugin that I definitely recommend you guys to use. And it's so easy. It's, basically threshold and range. So check that one out for sure.
What else
Cool.
have you got on there?
Were you going to say something, Michael?
Yeah. What else? Yeah.
So this is Todd, the background vocal. So we'll go through here real quick. Shep's Omni channel as well. I think we showed that a little bit because we were showing the focus part of this. CLA 2A, one of my favorite plugs for vocals. I used to use it when I worked in the studio all the time. Let me see if I can find this vocal.
You can't hear me tonight. You have to carry me back from Cali.
So I'll try not to solo it up too much. I know, like, if Todd's watching, he's just cringing right now. I know soloists or vocalists hate their stuff soloed up. But anyway, you'll notice that is a plug. Remember I talked about earlier with the CLA series, the 1176, 2A, 3A. That is a plug that I tend to use more compression with because I like what it does when you really dig into it. I'll play a little bit and I'll dig into it so that you guys can see what.
You can't hear me tonight. You have to carry me back from Cali. Now broken and I've lost my way. You have to carry me.
So you guys hear that it does a timbre change as well. It's not just it's not just compression. There's timbre change when you really nail that compressor. And I'm looking for that. I'm looking for some harmonic distortion, in the vocal. So that is Todd. Oh, Sibilance Live. Let's go to Miles because that'll probably give you a better idea of Sibilance Live. Sibilance Live is pretty amazing. All right. So Sibilance Live is a look ahead plugin. If you're not familiar with what look ahead means, it means that, first off, it means that when you're using a look ahead plugin, always know that you're adding just a little bit of latency because of that. But they've made a live version of this plugin that has better latency and really doesn't affect it too much. But what a look ahead plugin does is, here's the signal coming along. The look ahead plugin looks at this signal and says, is this a big dynamic or a small amount of vocal, for instance? Is there a big S here or not? And then as the signal gets to the actual plugin, it already knows to compress or expand that. So it's looking ahead to see where what's happening with the signal and then making decisions. So it's a smart plugin. And that's what Sibilance Live does. Let's listen to Miles a little bit.
You can't hear me tonight. You have to carry me back from Cali. I'm tired and broken and I lost my way. You'll have to carry me back to where I belong. You'll have to carry me back from Cali. I don't want money.
Let me poke this out so you can hear the difference.
Carry me back to where I belong.
Trying to give you an example of an S.
If you can't hear me tonight, you'll have to carry me back from Cali. I'm tired and broken and I lost my way. You'll have to carry.
So I hope you guys can hear the difference there. It just cleans up all of his S's. It's just an amazing de-esser.
One of the cool things about this as well is the visual side of it as well. It's like you can actually, you know, when you're in a live situation and you've got everything going on around you, having that extra big visual there is gotta be handy.
Totally is, especially when you're adjusting the threshold part of this. You know, you can definitely see what's happening and see the stuff coming at you. So yeah.
So one of the plugins that's staring me in the face that most people usually think is a studio plugin is this one here from our friend JJP. This really does highlight the fact that all of these plugins are used pretty much in the studio and live. What are you using the Signature Series plugin for?
It's amazing. So before you guys get all lost in latency, yes, it is a higher latency plugin. I purposely am not worried about specifically about high latency plugins on the vocal, because I feel like if a vocal has just a little bit of latency in relation to everything else, it actually makes the vocal kind of pop through your mix a little bit. So this was a decision. This was an informed decision, let's say. So that's my latency talk first. Second, man, JJP makes some of the best signature sounding plugins that Waves has. You know, every signature plugin that Waves makes is amazing. But I just dig through some of his stuff and go, wow, this is unbelievable. And for me, what I love about this plugin is the ethereal labels of stuff. Like, what the hell is magic? let's put that slider a little more magic in there. And space, you know, obviously is some sort of reverby kind of a thing. But anyway, it's pretty cool stuff. It's a quick way for me to get an amazing sounding vocal. Now, in the background of this plugin, are lots of stuff happening. There's like literally probably 5 or 6 other Waves plugins in the background of this GUI happening in order to create the tone that we're talking about. But I'll pop it in and out. You guys have an idea of.
If you can't hear me tonight, me back from Cali. I'm tired and broken and I lost my way. You'll have to carry me back to where I belong. You'll have to carry me back from Cali. Okay. I belong.
So you get the idea, right? It makes that vocal sound like a record vocal. You know what I mean? It gives it the low end kind of oomph to it and gives it that, you know, presence part of this. I love this attitude slider, which is actually kind of just harmonic distortion, and you can do all kinds of stuff to it. So anyway, yeah, it's an amazing plug. I dig it.
One of the things that I always love about your mixes is how huge they sound, even, and it makes you feel like you are in an arena, even when you've got headphones on. A lot of comments about your drums and your vocals and the mix in general. So before we close out, one of the things which actually there's a couple of questions that I want to ask. The first one is, there's a lot of people right now who are, I guess the word of the day is pivoting, or attempting to pivot from an industry that's had the bottom pulled out, the rug pulled out from it, into a part of the industry that's still giving some revenue. What's the best advice you think you can give someone who's been in live sound and is trying to get more into the recording or the mixing side of things in the studio side of things?
This is a great question because I feel like, first of all, the short answer to that is practice, practice, practice. Go get Reaper, man. I mean, it is like $40 or something for a license for Reaper. If you don't have a DAW, go get a DAW and sit in front of a nice pair of near fields or a good pair of headphones and learn about creating mixes that have space. Because when I hear some guys that are making that send me board mixes, that's what I see that lacks in their mixes sometimes, is the amount of space they're creating and placing things specifically in the left to right in their own space and not letting something else share that space. So practice, practice, practice. Go get a DAW and check it out. And if we aren't at the end of this amazing live sound mixers because we've all sat around and mixed, in near fields and headphones, I mean, I really see that's going to happen. Like, I think coming back, there's going to be some mixers that are just super badass because they had time on their hands. They learned what worked and experimented with stuff. So there's amazing online resources these days. If you're not spending this time learning, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's very true. So, and don't forget, on the Waves website, on the main menu, there's one of the menu items is Learn. And if you go under courses or under the video section under webinars, you'll find a ton of stuff from this young man on the screen with me right now, plus a lot of other Waves artists for live sound and for studio sound. So, Pooch, my friend, it's time for us to close up. If you had any last morsels of advice for anybody going forward in this weird year that we call 2020?
Unfortunately, we're not going to be working for a while. So if you can pivot to any way, churches are doing lots of broadcasts. If you can get involved with your local church and kind of keep your chops up. And I would just say, spend a lot of time with online presence. Waves, the website is an amazing resource. And just try to keep your chops up. I recently, I've been at home for like 4 months and I recently got in front of a Digico after not being in front of a Digico for 4 months. And I was like, man, I've kind of lost I need to get back into this. So don't let that happen to you. Try to keep your chops up. And by the way, all of these local sound companies are not working right now, but they might be willing to let you use some of their gear in their shop. I would reach out to all kinds of people and keep your chops up that way.
All right, well, beautiful. Pooch, my friend, thank you. Waves, thanks you. Everybody out there in viewer land, thanks you. Don't go away for a second. I'm just going to close this up and I'll be right back with you. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another fun Waves Open session. That's been an education in the art of mixing for live sound, but also a reminder that the same plugins used for mixes like that from Slash are just the same plugins and the same tweaks and the same methods for the studio or vice versa. These plugins bridge the gap between live and the studio. As I said, please, on the Learn menu of the Waves website, there are a ton of videos, tutorials, webinars that we've done over the years, and there are also courses. There's a great course by Dave Darlington from Mix to the Master, amongst other things. In the meantime, next week, I will be back with you for another Waves Open session and another amazing talent. Much love to you all. Much love to your family. Please stay safe. MPA out.